This is my first attempt to record a short video podcast, I guess, for all of you on Patreon. Thanks very much for supporting the show and me. It's really appreciated. And I thought this might be a nice way to develop the show a bit. My idea is to take three. Today, in this episode, we've got three stories I thought were interesting that came up on the recent episodes of Steal This Show. In this episode, we have that's something I want to buy. The Kindle Oasis. I thought it was looking pretty cool. I have an old Kindle, and this one is waterproof, which I think is pretty cool. But that's not a story for today. So the first is an article in The Intercept. Steve Bannon wants Facebook and Google regulated like utilities. I thought this could be kind of interesting, given that I've been arguing in a couple of recent shows that Google and Facebook are more like public utilities than they are like companies, and it feels kind of weird that Steve Bannon, of all people, agrees with me. The second is a excerpt from this show Exponent, which is a pretty interesting show. There's mostly these guys just talk about Apple and Facebook, but they occasionally talk about stuff which is actually really close to what interests me. And in this episode, they had a few minutes that covered exactly what I'm interested in. And then finally, because we had Ben Nimmo on the show talking about the so-called Battle of the Bots and the Russian troll farm, I was looking at just seeing what was out there on some of the stuff he was talking about, and I actually found a Russian TV interview, it looks like, with one of the people who worked in one of these Russian troll farms, and I thought it might be interesting to watch that together. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the article in The Intercept. Tech companies like Facebook and Google that have become essential elements of 21st century life should be regulated as utilities, top White House advisor Steve Bannon has argued, according to three people who've spoken to him about the issue. And then they compare Bannon's position with the Democratic platform Better Deal. It's also supposed to deal with breaking up monopolies and in a variety of sectors. Bannon's basic argument, as he outlined it to people who've spoken with him, is that Facebook and Google have become effectively a necessity in contemporary life. Indeed, there might be something about an online social network or a search engine that lends itself to becoming a natural monopoly, much like a cable company, a water and sewer system, or a railroad. And then it mentions that the sources had wanted to be anonymous. Regulating a company as a utility does not mean that the government controls it, but rather that it is more tightly regulated in a way, regulated in what it is able to do and prices it is able to charge. But it doesn't mean every element of the company will be regulated in that way. And here's another piece in the Atlantic, which expands on what The Intercept is talking about. What's going on here? And why is Bannon speaking up? What this Atlantic piece is saying is that Bannon's proposal is disconnected from the White House policy that he is, at least on paper, officially helping to strategize. The current chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai, is looking to undo the rule that broadband internet is a public utility, which itself guarantees the idea of net neutrality. Bannon's endorsement of stronger antitrust enforcement, not to mention a higher top marginal tax rate, could very well be the advisor trying to signal that he is still different from Trump. So what strikes me as interesting here is that it's become obvious since those articles were written, which is, I think, August. So August, September, October, November, 4 months. It's become obvious to us that Facebook, Google, specifically Facebook, have played a massive part in bringing Trump into power, and I wonder if Bannon is seeing that power because he can't have. I mean, Zuckerberg's definitely positioned on the progressive side, and maybe Bannon looked at Zuckerberg's tendencies and is now thinking, it'd be better if we regulated, if we brought Facebook under the control of governments, they would have less power like this. They would this kind of power would be less available to them. It struck me as interesting that it's opposing this kind of nationalism that Bannon espouses, this idea of, you know, America first. It poses that against the sort of international power of Facebook. One has to imagine that if Bannon, via the US government, managed to bring Facebook under some kind of control like this, that Facebook would just move offshore. I mean, it already is a completely virtual entity, but I suppose it could. It at least has an office. It at least has this little small village just down the road here. Maybe it could just move that onto a floating container vessel somewhere and run itself from there. So the second thing I wanted to look at is this piece from Exponent, which is this podcast I listen to, which I think is generally pretty interesting, even if these guys are fairly obsessed with Facebook and Apple particularly. And the latest episode, my God, is just Apple, non-stop Apple. But here's episode 130. The 50,000 foot view is actually partly a response to criticism that they're too obsessed with Apple and with Facebook, and they kind of start justifying why and what their thinking is. And this excerpt really gets into some of the things that I'm interested in on Steal This Show. So
why you want to form a political party and how you advertise and the amount of power that gives a political party in terms of picking acceptable candidates. But for all the reasons you just described, why something like a Dollar Shave Club can come along and threaten massive players like Unilever and Procter & Gamble, the same effects started to be felt outside the commercial world in the area of politics, for example. And we saw a politician rise very much outside the traditional channels towards the end of 2016.
And that idea of there being this sort of connectivity and all this stuff's related, when I wrote that article, The Voters Decide, that was really about, you know, how could Donald Trump happen? It relied on the observation in that article is that the power of the media was intertwined in that same sort of web we're talking about. It was intertwined with the power of the political parties. And it followed that if the media had lost its power, that the political parties had lost their power as well. And that's what created the conditions for this rise, was that intertwining, was that web. And if you didn't see that web, it was hard to see how could this happen? Like what happened here? And so it was very much the connectivity sort of thing, but that led to sort of this year's theme is dealing with the consequences. Like it's become very real and very concrete. And you're right, it happened first in politics. And why did it happen in politics? Because it happened first in media. Like media lost its power first. Right. And that led to this upheaval in politics. But buckle up, because what has happened in our politics is a preview for what is going to happen in every part of our economy. Everything falling apart, everything going crazy and chaos, because all the guardrails and all the support things all crumbled and we didn't even realize it happened. But this is the prediction part. This is going to happen everywhere.
Mm-hmm. I think a couple of reactions. First of all, that the fact that this happened first in media is absolutely essential.
I think the key thing is this idea that the power of the media and political power are intertwined, so that people didn't see Trump coming because they didn't understand the extent to which the media had lost the power to determine what was an acceptable political proposition. You know, the most obvious ways you see this is Trump just issuing one political travesty after another, whether it's racism, hardcore racism, sexism, admitting to assaulting someone on camera, etc., etc. Each one would then be responded to by the media, who would essentially telling the public, you can't vote for this guy, this is not a legitimate candidate, and discovering that no longer worked. Presumably because, at least in part because, people are paying more attention to what their peers are saying online in their filter bubbles than they are to the TV. So maybe they're watching the TV, maybe they're not. Maybe they're listening to the radio, maybe they're not. But even if they are watching and listening to the old media, they're more interested in how that's being interpreted on Twitter, on Facebook, on whatever blogs they're using, whatever forums they're taking part in. And it's occurring to me again and again at the moment that we're living at this epochal time, this break between one epoch and the next, where hierarchical media power is failing and distributed power is taking over. And that doesn't necessarily mean, as is quite obvious recently, that there's going to be a revolution in favor of that's going to make the world better. And what we've learned from Silicon Valley is there can be revolutions that don't necessarily make the world better. They just disrupt things in favor of new incumbents. But the important thing that they point out here is, the loss of media power led to a loss of political power, and then that this loss of power is going to be replicated in other areas. And what strikes me, and the obvious one, is Bitcoin. The obvious, or cryptocurrencies. So cryptocurrencies are a distribution of the power to create and maintain and operate monetary systems. BitTorrent was a distribution of the power to maintain media distribution systems. So just as the distribution of media, the power to do this, for example, to put out a video blog, have you guys see it, to run crazy to run a Twitter account, to run a blog, etc., etc. Just as those things distributed politics, now Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies around it are going to disrupt finance, and the question is, in favor of who? Anyway, let's push on with the podcast here. Push on with what they've got to say.
A little bit, and it's doing better. But you think about how all the
very real and very concrete. And you're right; it happened first in politics. And why did it happen in politics? Because it happened first in media. Like, media lost its power first, right. And that led to this upheaval in politics. But buckle up, because what has happened in our politics is a preview for what is going to happen in every part of our economy. Everything falling apart, everything going crazy and chaos, because all the guardrails and all the support things all crumbled, and we didn't even realize it happened. But this is the prediction part. This is going to happen everywhere.
Mm-hmm. I think a couple of reactions. First of all, that the fact that this happened first in media is absolutely essential. So TV, with its entertainment aspect, might have been insulated a little bit, and it's doing better. But you think about how all the money that used to flow into newspapers, they had this natural monopoly over advertising distribution in geographic areas, just completely dried up when consumers could go and read the best news anywhere, or started to get all their news from Facebook, and the advertisers followed the eyeballs, and then all the media started to disappear, and that had a direct flow and effect to exactly what you were describing. And I mean, I guess the second point is, it's crazy how, this week, like, we saw these tech companies dragged in front of a Senate hearing on these Russian ads. And again, we've talked about the fact that perhaps focusing so heavily on the foreign advertising is to miss the forest for the trees in terms of the impact, for example, versus things like filter bubbles. But at the same time, this is, for me, we talked about how the Professor Christensen, the What He Got Wrong article was like the spark that started this podcast. But I think the core of it is just thinking through how technology has been impacting society. And for me, this was like
that's our tagline, right?
Right. And this was it. Like 130 episodes in, we have these social media companies, and maybe Google, that's a bit loose in terms of defining it as social, but let's say media companies, tech media companies, being dragged in front of a Senate hearing. Like, the machinery of the old world is starting to wake up to the impact. And while a lot of those senators might not have really understood exactly what was going on, they're starting to sniff that, okay, this is becoming really a thing, and we need to get a handle on it.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about Facebook. Like,
they're talking about Facebook and Apple constantly, where I'll tend to talk about where on Steal This Show we'll tend to talk about smaller, more distributed peer-to-peer actors, but still the point remains that this power, which they mostly read through Facebook, and they mostly think everybody in the world's on Facebook, and the people who aren't are kind of irrelevant to them, is sort of has reached prime time. So whatever it is that I would argue that the power Facebook represents or that it concentrates is not specific to it. It is the same power that you can see present in, for example, the Russian troll farms. Because it's also present in Twitter, it's also present in YouTube. It's the general power to speak and be heard outside outside any form of, or outside the previous hierarchical forms of control. Moving on to the final thing I wanted to look at. This is this clip I found from Russian TV. It's with this. So on the last episode, we were talking to Ben Nimmo from the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Group. I hope you've had listened to the show. I think it was really interesting. Oh, by the way, interesting fact: I went to school with Ben Nimmo, and he reminded me that we used to walk around the grounds of the school, coming up with science fiction stories together when we were kids. I completely forgotten that. But this clip here is with this guy who spent 6 months working at the troll factory and has now retired to Thailand, teaching Russian. So presumably he got paid well. Anyway, let's take a look at the clip.
Хочется не только поесть, но и погулять, и вообще очень интересно провести время. А в этой фирме платят 50 тысяч рублей за так просто. Я решил, что это отличная сделка. При том, что совесть в ней вообще не участвовала.
Площадки для работы.
Я работал на форумах. 90% из них были форумы, посвященные политике, и 10% форумы, посвященные другим вещам, но где есть раздел политика.
А каким образом ты посеешь смуту? Либо в комментариях к новостям, либо на политическом форуме, без разницы.
Блокировка аккаунтов.
Сначала тебе нужно там из Кентукки быть реднеком, а потом тебе нужно из какой-нибудь Миннесоты быть, например, тоже белым чуваком, который там всю жизнь работал, платил налог, а через еще 15 минут тебе нужно выйти из Нью-Йорка, ну и начать на сленге американских негров что-нибудь писать. Ну вот как-то вот так. Но, опять же, я вам что хочу сказать. Все это работало очень хреново. Все эти прокси, я не знаю, не прокси, все это ломалось постоянно, блочилось. И у меня там, я не знаю, на каком-то из форумов у меня было вообще типа аккаунтов 20. С 20 разных...
I love this, that because the idea when they report on the Russian troll farms is that, they're sort of quite advanced operations. It's sort of all this weaponized media and advanced hackers and stuff. I like the fact that it's all a bit shambolic and that their proxies are constantly breaking down and so
Просто
on.
потому что 18 из них забанили.
Внутренний распорядок.
Я пригляделся, посмотрел, какие люди со мной рядом работают, что там, где камеры, как выглядит злой дядька, как выглядит добрый дядька. А там мониторятся все компьютеры, само собой, естественно, и стоят камеры, которые, наверное, даже записывают звук. Но в этом у меня очень большие сомнения. Потому что, столько раз мы там слушали гимн ИГИЛ и приветствовали друг друга «Слава Украине, героям слава», что, мне кажется, там нет звукозаписи все-таки.
Начальство.
Человек, которого РБК называла руководителем иностранного отдела, Джейхун Асланов. Некоторые из его бывших подчиненных называли его Джей-Зи. То, что именно он руководил иностранным отделом и, возможно, продолжает это делать, нам подтвердили 3 разных человека, которые в разное время работали на фабрике. Сам Джейхун в разговоре с нами заявил, что он не имеет к этому никакого отношения, и мы его с кем-то перепутали. На него записано 2 компании – ООО «Азимут» и ООО «Центр управления репутацией». Обе находятся в Петербурге, но обнаружить какую-либо активность по указанным адресам нам не удалось.
IP.
Создатели интернет-сайтов, люди, которые сидят и проверяют работу интернет-сайтов, с легкостью могут вычислить по IP. Конечно, ты должен был выходить хотя бы откуда-нибудь. Не из Санкт-Петербурга, а откуда-нибудь от Сиэтла до Флориды. Еще Аляска и Гавайи. Супер. Это очень легко делается при помощи технологий. Абсолютно легко. В принципе, можете сделать вы прямо сейчас.
Русский отдел.
В русском отделе работали школьники, по-моему, даже. Господи, по-моему, я как раз видел реальных школьников. Вот. Работали какие-то безумные люди возраста лет 45, которые реально прутся от господина Соловьева. Мне было западло общаться с этими людьми, которые там реально стоят в курилке и обсуждают, что какие американцы там козлы, а мы им так и вообще.
Расстрел Корана.
Мне на YouTube скинули видео, где афроамериканец, но, как выяснилось, африканец, в форме американского солдата стреляет в Коран.
On this book from 20 years. God, the shit they done to this fucking book.
И мне сказали, что это вот эти наши придурки сделали. Я вообще, ну что это такое? Причем там форма кривая вообще, неправильная. Потом они какого-то негра наняли и проститутку, и сделали видео, где негр занимается сексом с проституткой. Ну, и она якобы похожа на Хиллари Клинтон. Представляете? И, мол, якобы сенсация. Ну, вообще, вы понимаете, что это, ну, никто не поведется.
I love this. Just, I guess it's the shambolic nature of the production of this stuff. So, I guess when you look at some of the things that were going out on some of the stories that people have been following on Facebook and so on, they're crazy, and they look like they've been generated in crazy situations. And from what I understood from Ben, it seems like these troll farms would be kind of producing their own material and trying to float it as a story that people will potentially pick up. But how they got rewarded, I don't know. I mean, but I love the idea that they're dressing up some dude badly as an American soldier and then trying to get away with him, trying to make it convincing that he'd shot up the.
But the shit they done to this.
So it seems like they're producing anti-ISIS, or they're trying to rile up ISIS in America. Maybe, I guess, if it's in English in an American accent, they're trying to rile up American Islamic people, which kind of goes as well as doing propaganda against other American groups. I guess it goes to this idea that the Russians are in some systemic way just trying to get one faction fighting against another, or just trying to sort of rile up the different filter bubbles and get them going.
Эти наши придурки сделали. Я вообще, ну что это такое? Причем там форма кривая вообще, неправильная. Потом они какого-то негра наняли и проститутку, и сделали видео, где негр занимается сексом с проституткой. Ну, и она якобы похожа на Хиллари Клинтон. Представляете? И, мол, якобы сенсация. Ну, вообще, вы понимаете, что это, ну, никто не поведется.
Конспирация.
Если бы я чувствовал, что я занялся какой-то деятельностью секретной, очень секретной организацией, очень сильной и могущественной, которая делает серьезные дела, и если я помешаю им сделать их дела, они меня накажут, я бы с вами не разговаривал.
Евгений Пригожин.
This is interesting. So, what's going on here, it seems like, is that this Russian TV are interviewing this guy who worked in a troll factory about the nature of the troll factory and its relationship to the state. He's trying to imply something about how close or not it might be to the Russian government. And what he's saying is he doesn't think it could be very close to the Russian government, because otherwise he wouldn't have been allowed to be here talking to the journalists. So that seems to imply that he's trying to wrap his head around, what is this? Is it a commercial operation? And if so, what's the relationship of the operation to the state? It's pretty interesting stuff.
Увольнение.
Работа на фабрике не приносила Алану удовольствия. Он не скрывает, что со временем поднаторел в читерстве и приходил на смену подготовленным. Он заранее готовил несколько комментариев, которые подходили под его тематику на работе, и просто вставлял их в нужные форумы, в нужные дискуссии. 4 месяца он числился лучшим сотрудником смены, но позже начальство вскрыло его схему, и Алана попросили на выход.
Знаете, есть такой мем про фабрику троллей. Сидят люди в черных касках, там, в масках. У них сзади Путин висит, флаг России, они такие напряженные очень сидят. Я не знаю, что происходило днем, но ночью происходила вакханалия. Мы занимались самыми безобразными делами, которыми только можно было заниматься, черт возьми, 20-летним ребятам, очень веселым, и которые прекрасно понимают, в какое забавное место они попали. Меня уволили за то, что они заметили как-то, что вот одну смену я очень быстро справился с нормой. Они посмотрели, как так я это сделал, они увидели, что я очень ловко умею нажимать Ctrl-C и Ctrl-V. Вот, и вызвали меня с исключением на беседу.
Я не знаю, что было после. Те полгода, которые я там работал, это все было похоже на фарс и клоунаду. Это был постмодерн, самый настоящий. Постмодерн, дадаизм и сюр.
That just strikes me as being so much closer to reality than the idea of the dangerous hackers in masks and hoods and whatever with the Putin portrait. So he's been copying and pasting the same comments over and over again into forums, because in the end, I guess it's just a kind of pseudo-commercial attempt to create noise and disruption, and it would be very difficult for them to pick out that he's, doing, he's not playing by the rules and doing totally original comments. Anyway, I thought that was a pretty interesting insight into the probable reality of the dastardly Russians and what they're up to. It's all a bit chaotic, just as it is over here. Anyway, that's all for this short first episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to go off and edit it now and make it a bit more fun to watch. If you got any suggestions for how I can improve it, any other ideas, just drop me a line. And thanks again for supporting the show. Bye.